We're just setting up the technology and then we'll start our special meeting. Okay. And do that. Okay, so we're recording and we're live streaming to YouTube, correct? Yep. Okay, so now I need to read the next section. Yeah. All right, the time is now 6:35 and the executive session has been concluded. The participants in the executive session were town staff, Clay Buckner, Jim Harper, Tyler George, myself, Sally Barney, and Dana Cranker. For the record, if any person who participated and Jordan Bierma. For the record, if any person who participated in the executive session believes that there was any improper discussion or improper action in violation of the open meetings law, I would ask that you concerns for the record. Seeing none, we will adjourn the executive session and enter a special meeting. The time is 6:35 and okay. I want to start the public meeting just by giving everyone a little bit of a framework for what's happening tonight, and then I'll turn it over to Gloria. But this special meeting consists of 2 public hearings. And in order to make any decisions tonight, the board will need to vote with a majority of 4 votes to approve anything, as a majority of our entire board, including our 2 who are recused. So for something to pass tonight, we need a vote of 4 trustees in favor, or to deny. And Gloria, whenever you're ready.
We might have a technical difficulty with live streaming back on YouTube. Can you give me 1 minute? I just want to make sure it's ready.
Thanks for coming back, everybody.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Those on YouTube, I'm going to stop live streaming and start again. Not on here.
Okay, go to this one.
Okay. Yeah. Just 1 sec, we're just double checking.
Yes.
Nice.
Are we on?
Pull up, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Okay, so it's confirmed. We're streaming on YouTube and we're recording. So tonight's special meeting will consist of 2 public hearings. A public hearing has a specific process and it, the way that will work is we will open the public hearing, we'll receive a staff summary, we'll open public comment, we'll close public comment, we will close the public hearing, and then the board will deliberate and make a decision. So public comment that is pertaining to the specific agenda item will happen within the public hearing and be recorded as a part of the public process. Okay, so with that, we will open our first public hearing, which is the first reading of ordinance 2024-02, an ordinance of the town of Silverton imposing a temporary suspension on accepting construction permit applications in those areas defined as wetlands within Silverton town limits. Now we'll turn it over to staff.
So before you all tonight are 2 ordinances imposing a moratorium on accepting land use applications. First on the agenda is the 2024-02 ordinance that I was directed to draft in the February 26th meeting, imposing a moratorium on all land use applications that meet the town's adopted definition of a wetland. This is essentially a copy and paste from the moratorium that was adopted in July 2023. I would request that we stick to the public hearing model for each ordinance, so I will wait until 2024-03 ordinance to explain that one. The 2024-02 ordinance was published in the Silverton Standard on March 7th, 14th, and 21st. It was presented to the San Juan Regional Planning Commission on March 19th. The Planning Commission voted on the motion to deny both ordinances. The result was 3 yeas and 3 nays. Since the motion was a tie, Willie states that this result is a no recommendation. So there's a non-recommendation basically from the Planning Commission. Lucy has prepared a comprehensive memo on the board's options and subsequent requests by staff if those options are chosen. In her memo, she describes the parameters needed for a moratorium, including the need for a moratorium to address a community-wide issue with defined parameters and timeframe. The trustees should agree that they are pursuing regulations on wetlands in order to pass the moratorium. If the trustees would like more engagement from the community on whether or not to have regulations on wetlands, a moratorium is not warranted. If the trustees would like more engagement on how to regulate wetlands and what regulations should be put in place, then a moratorium is warranted. If the trustees intend to vote to pass the moratorium, staff is requesting direction on the trustees' intent during the moratorium in their motion as outlined in the memo. The code requires the majority of all trustees, not just those present, so 4 affirmative votes are required for the passage of an ordinance.
Okay, so with that staff summary of the first ordinance, which I will call is the blanket ordinance. It does not refer to a map. We will open public comment. If you would like, if you're in person and you would like to make a comment on this ordinance, you will have 3 minutes to introduce and speak.
Can I make a quick clarification?
Uh-huh.
So it's a moratorium on areas defined as wetlands, not a blanket moratorium
Thank you.
throughout town.
That's important. Yeah.
But it does not.
This is a
refer to
more
map.
expanded scope of moratorium ordinance relative to the next ordinance that will be in our second public hearing. Okay, so back to public comment. We'll start with in-person comment and then we'll move to Zoom comment. Do we have any in-person comment?
Thank you. Thank you for all the work you put in on this. The main thing,
Could you introduce yourself first,
I'm
please?
sorry, my name is Wendy Polly. And been a resident here for a number of years. I think this is very problematic in terms of that it could really cost the city a lot of money in legal actions. And I'll just give you an example. We had a piece of property that was under contract, $420,000. And an emergency moratorium was put in place for this, and that contract was defaulted. And they're really, number one, it's procedurally wrong, because it's my understanding, you have to have actions, things that are going to be accomplished. You can't just surprise people with moratoriums that interfere with business, cause harm and damage. So that's an example of one already. And we could pursue legal action on it. But, you know, the Supreme Court ruled on this. And so I think that there's some standing that probably multiple property owners would get together on. And why would we as a town want to go through this kind of expense when we could take a more reasonable approach that doesn't surprise people and interfere with contracts? So I'd say no, procedurally, and I really think that legally the basis may be wrong. So I think that we need to do a lot more understanding, planning, and have reasonable communication so that people understand what they're getting into. Otherwise, I think it could open a can of worms and cost the town a lot of money. So I say no on both. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other in-person comment? Yep, coming up in,
Hi, guys. Pete Meisel, number 41 Reese. Been here for over 20 years. Thank you for hearing me. I actually had the honor to serve on this board years ago, and one of the first things the lawyer did as an educational part of it, I'm sure you guys have heard this, so I don't want to go over too long, is he would let us know how we need to listen to the lawyer to make sure we didn't incur any extra liability, both with as a board and actually individually. So what I worry about, and let me first say, the moratorium as an environmental thing, I understand what you're trying to accomplish. However, I think going beyond a federal regulatory agency such as the Army Corps as a municipality, I don't think that works too good. So I'm not in favor of that at all. I'll just let you know that. The other thing is, I got my notes here. Well, I'll keep it short. These moratoriums, I'm coming from the private sector. Even with the delineation, I've seen your map and everything else, still causes a big gap when you're trying to get a building permit. Okay. That causes a lot of jobs. Excavators, contractors, realtors, whatever. But the bottom line is if you can't build and you have to get this delineation, it takes months or however long the moratorium is. I just don't see it being very productive. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
do we have any additional in-person comment?
What was the second part of the public?
Come up to.
I can clarify that. We have two public hearings tonight. This first one is on ordinance 2024-02. A temporary suspension on accepting construction permit applications in those areas defined as wetlands within Silverton town limits. We will also have public comment as a part of our second public hearing on the other ordinance, which is 2024-03. Imposing a temporary suspension on accepting construction permit applications in those areas defined as riverine and slope wetlands in the Ironwood Consulting Wetland Boundary Map in town Silverton.
Thank you.
You'll have an opportunity to make public comment on this public hearing and in our next one. Is there any additional in-person public comment?
Hi, Michael Polly. Appreciate y'all's work on this. And I think in addition to the prior comments, one of the things that this moratorium may do is increase the cost of building and permitting. And I think that would have an adverse effect on affordable housing, which is really needed in this town. And so I'd say no for them.
You? Additional public comment for this ordinance? And do we have any public comment for ordinance 2024-02 on Zoom? We do. So just introduce yourself and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Cool.
Hi. Melissa.
Hi. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, Melissa Childs here. Thank you for taking my comment. As you know, the land use code rewrite is currently underway. Wetland regulations should be approached to this proper public process. The town of Silverton staff is currently managing 13 grants, valued at over 10 million in funding. These wetland conversations are derailing the town of Silverton priorities that you, as a board identified. Wetland policy should be taken off of the staff's shoulder and addressed through the code rewrite. If you place either of these moratoriums in place tonight, you will be directly impairing the well-being of our local economy and families, not to mention setting town of Silverton up for severe legal consequences, such as a class action lawsuit. Please deny both ordinances in front of you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment on Zoom? Oh, we do.
Hey, this is Melody. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you. Loud and clear.
You know,
That's the wrong one.
sorry.
Oh, just a minute. We'll restart that here.
Hi, Melody. We just have a technical, so go back to Melody's. Okay, Melody, you can speak again. Try again.
Are you sure?
Yes, you got it.
Melody, I'll restart your timer and the floor is yours.
This has been a hard discussion for a long time. There's so much emotional, it's so emotionally charged. And I guess at this point, I want to remind you that regardless of what you do, if you put in something, it'll be subject to litigation. And anybody who has the money and wants to build, they're going to be able to bring in their own experts and, get an attorney and take everything from there to get the permission to go ahead and build in the wetlands, whether that's putting new wetlands somewhere else or something. And I just wanted to remind you that you have that legal thing that hangs over your head. And I hope that you make the decision you feel best about, but I know it's tough. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then you can remove her from speaking.
Anyone else on Zoom? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and we will open up for trustee deliberation and decision. I kind of want to take the temperature of the board to keep our meeting moving. Is there support from the board on this ordinance, or would it make sense for us to move to our next one? Do we want to deliberate on this particular ordinance?
I think I've already said that I can't support this moratorium in its current form because I feel it's too broad. And so I think it has too many effects that aren't beneficial for the town or the community. So I could not vote for this moratorium.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the next.
Jim, are you
Agree.
okay? All right, Jordan, are you okay with moving on to the next ordinance?
Yes, I'm good with that.
Okay, thanks. So then I would would someone be willing to make a motion to deny ordinance 2024-02?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Cranker,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Birma,
Yes.
trustee George,
Yeah, yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yes. Okay, thanks, Anna. All right, so now what we'll do is move to our second public hearing of the night, which is the first reading of ordinance 2024-03, an ordinance of the town of Silverton imposing a temporary suspension on accepting construction permit applications in those areas defined as riverine and slope wetlands in the Ironwood Consulting Wetlands Boundary Map within Silverton town limits. So we'll go through the same steps for this ordinance, starting with our staff.
So this ordinance was drafted outside of trustee direction after not having the resources in the February 26th meeting to address the idea to create a moratorium based off the Ironwood Consulting Wetland Boundary Map. The drafted ordinance imposes a moratorium on land use and development applications within the borders of the slope and riverine wetlands as defined on the map until December 31st, 2024. The 2024-03 ordinance was published in the Silverton Standard on March 7th, 14th, and 21st. It was presented to the San Juan Regional Planning Commission on March 19th. The Planning Commission voted on the motion to deny both ordinances. The result was 3 yeas and 3 nays. Since the motion was a tie, Willie states that this result is a non-recommendation from the Planning Commission. Lucy has prepared a comprehensive memo on the board's options and subsequent requests by the staff if those options are chosen. In her memo, she describes the parameters needed for a moratorium, including the need for a moratorium to address the community-wide issue with defined parameters and timeframes. And I had already explained earlier about this, if we do put in a moratorium in place, we are working towards wetlands regulations. And trustees should clarify the goal and scope of regulations, if regulations should be included in the land use code updates. Trustees may also determine more public outreach is necessary to determine the goal and scope of regulations and direct staff to conduct such public outreach. If the trustees intend to vote to pass the moratorium, staff is requesting direction on the trustees' intent during the moratorium in their motion as outlined in the memo. And the code requires the majority of all trustees, not just those present. So 4 affirmative votes are required for the passage of an ordinance.
Okay, thanks, Gloria. With that, we will open this ordinance 2024-03 up for public comment. We'll start with in-person comment first. So if you'd like to make a comment on as a part of this public hearing, we'll start with in-person comment.
My name is Ken Safransky, and I've been a member of the Planning Commission for 32 years. And I missed the meeting. So I was guilted into coming here and to saying a few words, but I understand why this might be a little difficult, because based on the Compass plan, there's kind of a conflict. The plan encourages affordable housing and affordable development. And it also emphasizes the need to protect the environment and the quality of life here in Silverton. We, in the past, over 32 years, have dealt with overlay districts. And the slope overlay district is one of them, slope hazard overlay, and it was easy. But the avalanche overlay, it was one of those where we did it once, we did it twice. If we didn't like the answer, we asked the question again until we got an answer we liked, which is kind of funny. But here you have a map now, and I'm mainly concerned about the requirements for the slope area. As building inspector for 12 years, I looked at that hillside area, especially over here, and found that the water was all on the surface running through colluvium and then stuck on top by a layer of clay or bentonite. And we felt that with engineering requirements, it was actually buildable. And I've also felt that a 25-foot setback that I saw in here, we did for purgatory on jurisdictional wetlands, but here the lots are so small that the 10-foot setback could be a lot. And I'd also make the point that we're dealing with very small impact areas. If you had pressure in the next year to develop 12 of these lots, that would only be 30,000 square feet of wetlands that would be involved. In the county, if you have all your property in an avalanche path or something like that, we try to think of a way you could use that property, like allowing summer use or a camper or something like that. That way we don't feel like we're involved in a takings, which is a temporary condemnation of the land. And on this slope area, I feel that wetlands impact could be mitigated through engineering, and you could address all of the environmental impacts. You have to, if you have to involve the public in this process, and I think a moratorium's not called for, because I think we could finish this process and have a proposal and a clear code on how to develop at least some of these, or allow for development on some of these wetlands, just by writing up a proposal. And if you don't have involvement of the public, you're not really giving the property owners a fair chance to say something about it. So I think we got, a lot of smart people here, most of you, and you ought to be able to come up with something in a year. And now that you have a map, let's do a code. And, send us something, a proposal, or we'll send you one. As a planning commissioner, I'm not speaking as a planning commissioner, but, okay. I'm not in favor of the moratorium at all. I think we should just let something happen and fix it later.
Thanks, Ken. Okay, is there in-person comment?
Andy Polly again. On this one in particular, there's two things that I would like you to maybe think about, consider, in that the map, very talented people that drew these maps, don't disrespect them at all. However, I have a question. When I can give you an example, one of the riverine spots that they've identified is a trench that was dug by the city on 6th Street. And so that's not a riverine from my perspective. And so one of the questions I have on that is, how does this map change if the city decides that we have a different drainage problem next month when everything starts melting, and digs a trench down 7th Street, let's say, then is that a riverine? And are those people's property impacted? So I just don't think that, well, number one, that map, what happens when it changes? And how do you identify a trench as a riverine? That's just problematic. Second thing I have is, when we found out that this moratorium was done in September, I was told that for me to prove that it wasn't wetlands, our property in particular, that I needed to get in touch with the Army Corps of Engineers. And the Army Corps of Engineers had to come out and prove that it wasn't wetlands. Okay, so I called the Army Corps of Engineers, and they said, based on the Supreme Court ruling, that they was not their jurisdiction. In fact, they don't want to come out and do this. So what you're doing is putting the property holders into a position that they can't do. You're between a rock and a hard place. So I did put in the request for the Army Corps of Engineers to come out, and it's on the back burner. Who knows when they'll come out? They don't even think they'll come out this spring. It's not something they want to do. And so you're just basically, that land, 6 lots on the main street of town, has been co-opted. And so there's no path to get there. And so we have to think about those things. If the map changes, who decides ultimately whether it is wetlands or not? Because the Army Corps of Engineers isn't going to do it. So I say no on this one too. Thank you.
Thank you. In-person comment?
Hi, Bruce Conrad. I come to you, I'm in uniform, but I come to you just my citizen, Bruce Conrad hat on. And in all transparency, I do have a piece of property that would be affected by your discussions here. I feel like there's already a mechanism in place for preserving wetlands. For instance, my property, should I choose to build on it, I'm going to have a survey done, do an in-like kind restoration of a wetlands in another area in order to build on my property and essentially destroy the wetlands that there is. So I think we're kind of reinventing the wheel by creating all of this controversy around things that already seem to have a mechanism in place. Secondly, I would suggest, while I'm a big fan of nature, obviously it's a big part of why I live here and I'm a fan, we're also talking about just the incorporated downtown city limits. And I would liken that to the business pedestrian zone downtown is a place where we allow unlimited weekly rentals. We allow pot shops. We allow certain things we don't allow in the rest of town. Much like my view of how Silverton is in the county. We have 388 square miles here. We do a really good job of preserving a hell of a lot of nature here. And I think that in downtown, it's kind of the business pedestrian zone of our county. Thank you.
you. In-person comment?
Anthony Edwards, 1033 Cement. I know you all have spent a lot of time over starting, I think, in 2022. I'm not going to be for or against. Let's leave it to the lawyer to come and say that. But I do want to bring something to your attention. I think you probably already realize it. You know, we adopted the definition before and we've worked through that. And that's, you know, that's in place inside our code. I think where there's some confusion is what the intent is here. You know, there is that we have a map now. And again, I'm not advocating one way for that or the other or for the previous, but is the intent to go ahead and put a regulation in place. And it seems like if that's the intent that this is being passed for, should it pass, then that should be at the next agenda. I think there's a confusion based upon, there is some by me as well as like other people I talk to around the community. We need December 2024. Are we just gonna just wait, or otherwise is the intent to actually preserve these and purchase them? And if we need to have that discussion as well. So it's one thing to have the moratorium, but there's a lot of confusion as what the board's intent is. And I don't know that that's going to be clarified tonight. I know that may be different for each one of you, but just I would like you to keep that in mind. That's not just me, but a lot of people I've talked to on both sides where we're going. So thank you.
Thank you. In-person comment.
Mike Polly. Just like to echo the other comments, and I would like you to deny this ordinance.
Thank you.
Cody Brayford, 541 Green Street, and everybody else spoke very eloquently about exactly what I wanted to. So yeah, just saying that I'm a no as well on the moratorium.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ian Tanner. From the beginning of this discussion, it's been interesting to listen to the comments and the discussions and how it's worked. And I understand it's extremely convoluted and legally dangerous. But I'm constantly asking myself, is that opinion completely focused on and biased solely toward profit? In Travels with Charlie, John Steinbeck made the always appropriate and aware query, I wonder why progress looks so much like destruction. Humanity is not the arbiter of what is good. That's an illusion that we've come up with to make ourselves feel comfortable with what we do and don't do. And I know this is an extremely difficult conversation. But it's also important to the beings that we aren't. And I feel like it's your job to defend them as well. I realize we have to pay to eat and rent and have electricity. However, there are other beings involved in this discussion that are not humans, and it matters to them. Even though there's plenty of space, we keep taking it, and we keep taking it even after the two hottest winters on record, and as the sea level temperatures rise. And I don't know how much people attribute that to things like this of I care about the trees, unless it's blocking my view, and then I'm going to cut it down. There has to be a point somewhere where we decide, I think that's enough. And I understand it's legally dangerous. However, I also think that is extremely appropriate to take into account while these decisions are being made. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pete Weisel again. I just wanted to go on record that I'm kind of hoping, like, echo what Kenny said, is looking for a code rewrite or something else besides a moratorium. Instead of slowing down the process, keep going forward, but maybe a code rewrite or bring something to the public. Thank you.
Dave Zanoni, 524 East, local contractor. Having been involved in government for a little bit myself with Pete, they always talk about the little tools in the toolbox. To me, a moratorium is pulling a 10-pound sledgehammer out of the bottom of the toolbox. Why don't you dig around the toolbox a little more and look for a little lighter tool? Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Evan Harris. I'm not a builder, I'm not a contractor, I don't own one home or 4 homes or multiple pieces of property in town, so I can empathize with how this feels to a lot of people. Or I can understand it. I think I just want to say too that this hasn't been a rushed conversation. There's been times that I've been alone here in this room while you all have been discussing moratoriums and wetlands, and there has been a lack of conversation. And I think that has been a detriment because now it feels again like things are rushed, and that's how things felt in July. However, it hadn't been rushed. It had been talked about for actually quite a while. It's also unfortunate that it's sort of a lose-lose situation, that we will lose and are already losing our natural resources that are finite, and then also losing business, losing land, or losing a piece of your land, or losing how you want to do it, how you want to build on it. In the last 100 years, we've lost 90% of wetlands, which are extremely important. And you can't just build them back. It's extremely hard. So super difficult decision. I think that the whole thing has been like the intent, like where do we go after? How do we put protections, but not have it be a blanket thing so that there can be responsible development without taking out the most valuable of the wetlands. Because yeah, like not all the wetlands are super important. And I think we've heard that and been like, there has to be compromise in there. So that's just all I want to say.
Thank you. Do we have any more in-person comment? Okay, let's look at Zoom. Anyone on Zoom? Yep, I see a raised hand.
Hi, Deanne Gallegos, 245 East 11th Street. I'm not necessarily here to give an opinion on the decision you guys should make tonight, but what I really want to advocate for after listening to all the meetings, writing about it, being on the sidelines, is for the public process, right? One thing that Silverton has become really good at is a community process, compass project. And it seems odd that there's a tandem land and code use process happening that does include the public. And yes, it has been a slow burn. And yes, those conversations have just been honestly in this room, and some who've been on Zoom. And that's just kind of the way Silverton works. It's usually a slow burn until it becomes a dumpster fire. This is starting to feel a little bit like the OHV vote, right? When the board made that decision, which ended up being what the community wanted, to be honest, through a community vote. But when you have 4 people making decisions, that is a huge community conversation. I really want to implore this board to use and lean on Clarion and the land use process that will be going to the public from here on forward. And that is my statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Melissa, go ahead. Introduce yourself and we've got.
Hi, Melissa Childs here. I just feel like we really need more public input on this. I'm going to go ahead and read from the staff report here. While activities related to wetlands are included in the 2022 Compass Master Plan, Imposing wetland regulations within the land use code is not. Therefore, staff recommends allowing community engagement to inform wetland regulation. Staff recommends taking a two-phase approach to public outreach. Phase 1 would begin immediately and use a wide variety of tools to capture the engagement of a wide variety of community members. The goal of this phase would be to better understand where the community stands in terms of wetland regulations, identify areas on the wetlands boundary map that community members would like to impose regulations on, and identify regulatory tools the community is most comfortable with. This information would be used to inform regulation drafted by Clarion, which would be included in the final land use code draft. Phase 2 would begin during the land use code community engagement sessions this summer. During this time, community members would have an opportunity to engage in the land use code public outreach review, the drafted regulations, and provide staff and Clarion with feedback. If directed so, staff will work with Ironwood Consulting and Clarion to prepare a more detailed approach to public outreach at a future meeting. So I just feel like we need more public input. I think that a lot of people aren't fully aware of what's going on. You have to be really tuned in to, reading agendas. And we have this concurrent code rewrite happening. So let's use the resources that we've paid for. I would ask that you please deny this moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Jim and Tisha, introduce yourself and the floor is yours.
Hey, yeah, this is Jim Weller at 1034 Bluff Street. I had some things I wanted to say tonight, but a lot of the public has already really commented on a lot of my main points here. What someone did bring up is really what is the real intent of the moratorium. I do wonder that. I think we all kind of know what a wetland is now, especially with the map now. I think we're dealing with the slope and riverine, and I think we all can say that the riverine is something that is mostly jurisdictional. So we're really talking about the slope, and the slope is really only about 3% of our 600 acres here in our town. Does this moratorium, are we looking to preserve these take away from some of our more important resources? Are we looking for a regulatory scheme of some kind, which I believe is something that some other people have said that we could probably iron out on our own here in the next agenda possibly. There are currently no applications in town hall right now for any of these wetland zones. I don't understand. I mean, the process is review, and review takes time. We've been shut down for 8 months, and now we're looking at another 9 to 10. There are no applications, but let's say you come in with an application right now, it's going to take 10 months to figure that out. And in these slope areas, there's not even any infrastructure. It's going to take a lot of time. So I just don't really see the need for a moratorium at this time. We know that these wetlands will be built on someday. I mean, we will most likely put some kind of regulations on them, and people will have money, and we'll just do what it takes to build on them. It's private property. People have been paying taxes on them for years. And you can't deny people of that, and they will just come up with the money. We need to spend our time on really more important things. We really need to look at embracing development and our private property owners that have been paying taxes for all these years, like I said. development will help build our community. I mean, we have a really good community right now, but our community is not sustainable right now the way it is. We need to embrace the growth. I do know we need to look at how that growth goes, but to just stop it with this moratorium right now is not the way to go. I would say vote no on this, and let's find some other solutions. We can iron this out ourselves. And yes, the public comment or the public process really needs to happen. We have this land use code right now that's laid out for us. We're ready to roll. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Okay. All right, introduce yourself and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Barney. My name is Logan Austin, and I am here to speak in opposition to the ordinance as proposed. And the reason is quite simple. It's housing, housing, housing. If you ask any town administrator, city councilor, or business owner across this state what their primary concern is that they face in their community, this is the answer you will get. And in mountain communities such as Silverton, this issue is even more of a challenge. In an effort to build a vision for the future and get ahead of the housing crisis, Silverton as a community spent countless hours working together to arrive at what became the Compass Master Plan. This plan is the guiding principle that leads the way to solving this critical issue as outlined in the 20+ pages of that report, which focuses on housing, infrastructure, and the sustainable growth of the community. Yet, beginning in the fall of 2022, this current governing body decided to take significant steps that circumvent the vision and goals of the community and put a moratorium in place that is very similar to the one being contemplated here. The stated objective of this action was that it would be very temporary and only in place to allow time to gather more information as it relates to potential changes to the code that might address concerns regarding all wetlands, jurisdictional or not. However, the stated objective must be called into question, as when it came time to select a consulting firm for the project to gather information and create a wetland map, the BOT decided against rewarding the RFP to one of the many very well qualified firms that have no direct affiliation or ties to Silverton, which would have allowed for the most objective result possible, and instead awarded Ironwood Consulting with the project. Emily Thorne, the principal of Ironwood Consulting, made a public comment during the November 28th Board of Trustees meeting in 2022, in addition to submitting written comments to the BOT and town staff. During those public comments, she spoke out against the Robert Road and Gibson project, illustrating that she had opposition to development and expressed concerns regarding development areas that may be wetlands, whether jurisdictional or not, arguing the Army Corps does not do a sufficient job. She ended her comments with urging the BOT to pump the brakes a little bit and take a step back before they start issuing permits at every request. These comments clearly demonstrated a personal interest and bias, which creates a significant conflict of interest. Ironwood Consulting should have been eliminated outright from the RFP process and never given the award, in which nearly $30,000 of public money have now been spent to produce a subjective map that is now the basis for what can amount to a significant regulatory takings of private property by the town of Silverton. If the town were to wrongly proceed with such regulatory takings, the Board of Trustees needs to deeply consider legal ramifications they are creating for the town and the significant cost of just compensation to property owners as required by the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution and legally defending the town against such claims. In addition to legal pitfalls for the town that are likely to occur by taking a significant amount of private property, the town is in effect further reducing the amount of housing units that could be built. These build sites could equate to many, many much needed housing units over the coming years that would never be built. This reduction in housing units will be a strain on the community and a driving force in the price of housing continue to increase well beyond the reach of ordinary citizens. The effect of overly burdensome regulations and policies like moratoriums have played out in many mountain communities across the West, and the end result is always the same. Communities plagued by housing issues, workforce reduction, and a total loss of true community, as only the uber elites with outside money and wealth can now live and thrive there. This is why I strongly urge you, BOT, to deny the ordinance as presented and make it a Silverton for all. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, do we have any other public comment from Zoom? I don't see any, but.
Oh, there's one more.
Okay,
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
yep, we can.
Hi, everyone. Jake Kurzweil, 957 Ree Street here in Silverton. I'm so sorry that I missed most of the earlier comments. I was putting my daughter down, but obviously an important discussion, and I empathize and relate with a lot of what I'm hearing here. And I just kind of want to point out one thing from the master plan that I was happy to participate in. And I'm kind of hearing some language saying, hey, we don't see this in the master plan. I'd point you to, what is this? Page 67, strategy B, create environmental land use and policies. Not only does it say that we should clearly define environmental and wildlife habitat protection, it says to prioritize it as part of the land use development code. It says, what's the timeline? Short. And the responsibility is the planning department. So clearly it's been outlined for the last couple of years, and I think there's been quite a bit of input on this. I really appreciate pointing out that when we're talking about this discussion, we're talking about less than 6%. And those ecosystems have incredible value outside of just environmental value, but also to our community in terms of infrastructure themselves. These store immense amount of carbon. They're also flood mitigation. And when we develop town, which we really need to, we need to develop town. We need to develop over 95% of town. We need to think about how to do it in a way that doesn't impact the infrastructure that already exists and how to do it in an economically viable way. So preserving systems that provide massive benefit to flood regulations or reducing metal loadings or sequestering carbon that already exist, that seems like a win-win to me. I think we can find solutions that are not zero sum in that we can actually find win-win here. And I think the tool that you have in front of you actually has quite a bit of benefit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any more public comment from Zoom? Okay. Seeing none, we will close public comment and close this public hearing, and we'll move to deliberation and decision from our board. So would anyone like to start our discussion?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
So I would like to point out, there's been a lot of public comment tonight. Sort of pointing out that, we've gone about this process wrong and that we've arrived here as almost a surprise. But 2 years ago, we had a crowd bigger than this yelling at us to stop a development and asking us to please do something. And we couldn't. Absolutely couldn't. The lawyer told us they've started the project. Your hands are tied. You've approved it, or the administration has approved it. And you have to allow this to go through. We had no tools to review it. We were basically told our hands were tied. So I just want to start by saying, we didn't all of a sudden just decide to focus on wetlands. God knows I don't want to be up here talking about this. But the reason we're here is because of another, it was kind of a surprise. And a lot of people in town, a lot of the public was really vocal. And they were like, we want something done. And we tried, and we've been working on it. But one of the only things that we could see to do, while we at least did a map, and then not only complete a map, but find which parts of the map actually had value and value to our community. We needed to put something in place that actually allowed us to, stop some of these permits. And that's why we started with this moratorium. It wasn't an easy decision. There's a lot of strong feelings on either side, but I felt at the time, and I still feel, that we need to finish the process that we started. Again, we have part of a map, we need to figure out what the value is. And then we want to figure out if we're going to put that into a land use code. And again, and I've stated this in previous meetings, they come back and they say, these are all man-made wetlands and these are worthless. Awesome. Let's build on them all. But we don't know that. And I think that we have had a bunch of meetings about this. We have had this on almost every agenda since, I feel like since that moratorium, or at least it feels that way. Since the first time we voted on it. We had a lot of people speak about how important wetlands are, if they are, you know, high value wetlands, but again, we don't know that. So if they are out there and we can finish this process, then I would like to finish the process with the folks that we have hired. And again, if they don't find any, then excellent. We know what we've got and let's go ahead and build on them. But if they, you know, if they are all high quality wetlands, then I think that's something that we need to think about saving. I think it's really important. And I heard a lot of community feedback saying people want to save wetlands when we had another project going through that we couldn't stop.
Thanks for going first, Tyler. And for your comment. Jordan, thanks.
Yeah, Tyler actually expressed a lot of what I was going to say, but I think there's just a couple of important things to kind of clarify after hearing a bunch of public comments. Affordable housing was brought up a bunch. None of this area has been specified or designated as affordable housing. And just building houses doesn't necessarily make it affordable. I think the other kind of important stated goal that we came up with as a board from the last meeting was kind of what Tyler expressed of, one, we need to finish the map so we can determine the value of these wetlands. Two is there need to be time so that we could take whatever that information is and incorporate it into the land use code if that was necessary. Because if we just act and do things before the land use code or after the land use code, it could make portions of the land use code irrelevant or more relevant, depending on what we find from that. And it was expressed when we spoke with the staff of like that was probably a realistic timeline of how long that would take, especially with a new board being elected shortly. I mean, we can take a hard and fast opinion, or I could at least, on whatever issue is in front of me, but in a couple weeks, I'll be sitting in the seats with everybody else. So it's good to leave all options open for our next board and involve the community as much as we can with all the information once we're able to get all the information and complete our map.
Okay, thanks, Jordan. Jim or Dana?
Jim's still writing, so we'll go ahead.
Well, maybe we could take a minute and I could use the bathroom and come right back. I'm so sorry. I will get it back. Yeah. It's tough. I plan to clean it up. Oh, yeah, it's just, what's wrong with it? Like our security system.
They're coming out next week.
Thank you. Did you guys decide?
Solved it all.
I think we should hear from all of the trustees and then we need to move towards a decision. So Dana, are you willing to go?
Sure, I will go. So I've said this in a lot of these meetings. I think what we're having right now is a values conversation. And I just want to state for the public, for people listening, for us as a board, for town staff, I think it's quite a shared value that we have, that we love this natural environment around us. If you ask anybody why they came here, why they're still here, how they came here, the natural environment around us is a common theme. It's why we stay, it's why we've come. And so I just want to center us on that shared value. I think what we've been having a conversation around is like, well, what do we do with that? And what does it affect? And when we originally started this conversation, we were all a lot less educated than we are now. I have learned a lot in the last 18 months. I'm thankful for that education from the community, from experts, from talking to people, from reading on my own. And I think we had an inflection point where we didn't even really know the spaces we were talking about. We didn't know the tools that we had. And so we now have a little bit more information. I think the map that we have is useful. I was willing to spend the money on it because I think it gives us a common point to say, where are we actually talking about? What are we actually referring to? And then have the values conversation around, okay, what do we want to do with it? And I think what I've heard tonight is that there is kind of a process problem. And I think the problem with our process thus far is that this board has not actually answered the question of what is the regulatory goal we want? Because I think we have differing opinions. And so we haven't been able to answer that question and say, we want to regulate building on non-jurisdictional wetlands, or we don't want to regulate building on non-jurisdictional wetlands. And so that has led to us and the staff and the community all feeling very confused about what the outcome is that we're going for. And so where I'm sitting right now with the moratorium in front of us, this was a moratorium that we kind of kicked around at the last meeting in February, or at the meeting in February, as something of a compromise, right? Could we narrow the scope? I think what we had before was too broad, that we had lands that were casualties of a process. And I think what we have in front of us is narrower, for sure. That's a compromise. I think the hangup for me with voting on this moratorium in favor is that our memo states that the moratorium is supposed to have a clear regulatory goal. And again, I don't think we have a clear regulatory goal because we as a board and we have as a community have not decided if we should regulate building on wetlands in town beyond what the Army Corps does. So that's where I'm struggling with voting in favor for this moratorium. I'd kind of like to suggest a different way forward. I think from what we heard tonight, from a variety of public comment that I've heard just to me personally, is that I really think we need the community's voice in this decision. And that's been missing in a structured way. And so we've had, groups speaking to one side of this issue on some nights and groups speaking to the other side of this issue on other nights. And there's few of us sitting up here trying to make this decision and determine what the outcome is. And even though I am hesitant to put it all back into your hands, because I may not get the outcome that I want, I'm willing to trust the community and trust the process to have the community help make this decision. So I think what I'd like to suggest is an alternative way forward. First, I'll state that I can't vote for the moratorium today. I don't think it's a benefit to this community. I don't think it's the tool that we need to use. But what I'd like to suggest as an alternative is putting this decision and what we want the outcome to be back in your hands. And so I think we should direct staff to utilize the land use code to get input from the community on if or how the land use code should speak to regulating building on non-jurisdictional wetlands. We need to answer that question, and then depending on the answer to that question, decide what a regulation should look like or not. I think we've spent countless hours of meetings on this topic. We all have informed opinions. We've spent so much time on this issue. I think it's time we remove this discussion from the Board of Trustees' opinions and put it back in the public space. And we heard a lot of that today. I've heard a lot of that from both sides about this process. I think we should get our code rewrite process to give us feedback from everyone that's interested in this land use issue in a way that's transparent, accessible, and focused, as opposed to public meetings that don't have kind of a clear stated goal of what we're trying to get to at the end. We hired a professional team with Clarion. We have really great staff, and we need to let the community decide if or how our land use code should regulate building on wetlands in town. I think it's time that the people get to have a say in what the outcome is instead of us voting on what the outcome is. Because if we vote for a moratorium, that is us telling the staff the land use code should have regulations on non-jurisdictional wetlands. Like, I can't vote for a moratorium unless I'm willing to say that. And I'm not willing to make that decision. I think you guys should. I think the decision should be informed by property owners, neighbors, individual citizens, builders, developers, subcontractors, whoever. All of you spoke today that have a stake in this, have an opinion, and want to hash out the value discussion that we're having. I think this process could be guided and informed by options that are legal, first of all, operational by staff, and within the town's municipal powers. I think this process can also help educate our community about the options and the implications of regulations. And I think to some of our public comment, we have great people in the town who've thought about this on a private level, and we can tackle some of those issues in a way that isn't just the town board voting on something. We have a map, so we can guide our conversation. So we're more transparent about what we are and aren't referring to, what is jurisdictional potentially, what isn't. And I think at the end of the day, we have a process in place to get us to an outcome. That process is the land use code rewrite. We should use it. It's effective, it's a tool, it's appropriate. I think the process to get us to an outcome, the outcome is answering the question, what does the community want the land use code to say about building or not building on non-jurisdictional wetlands in town? And I think the process to get there is community engagement through that drafting. I think we have great recommendations from staff in the memo on how to do that. And so as much as you all have been engaged in this, I hope this is just the starting point. You get to come back, you get to fill out a survey, you get to read actual things that could have impact, and you get to think through. Our town is full of really smart, thoughtful people, and I think that we can do this. I think at the end of the day, again, I want us to remind ourselves that we do have a shared value. It might play out a little bit differently in where we place that value, but we all love this land around us, and we all care about this community being a livable, workable community. And I think, again, we may disagree about how that's expressed, but let's stop disparaging our neighbors, spreading misinformation, and then let's use the process that we have to find compromises. I also just want to remind everybody that the town has prioritized wetland restoration. We are spending $64,000 in our budget on restoring wetlands. It's not like we haven't prioritized this or that this isn't important. So when we have, flyers around and things like that, it's not completely honest about the discussion we're having and what the town and town staff are doing. And then I just want to say, my colleagues, I'll close with my long diatribe that I just really respect the way we've been able to have this conversation. I think, I'm just thinking back to how sometimes these difficult conversations have been really divisive and aggressive, and the tone of disagreement has been really poor. And I think it's pretty incredible that we have so many people engaged and we're still listening to each other respectfully. Colleagues have listened to each other respectfully. And I just appreciate that. And I just challenge us all to continue that tone on this issue as we move forward to an actual outcome. Thanks for listening.
That's really nicely prepared. Thanks, Dana.
No, it was nice. Thank you, Dana. The question tonight from those in person and those online, the overwhelming sentiment is why? Why are we doing this? How did we get here? This has been a almost 2-year process, 22-month process that we've walked this path because there was no real definition on the books. Because we did not have rules, regulations, we didn't even have a map. So we, through the process of 22 months, conversations, meetings, community engagement. We contracted with Ironwood to create a map, get us a definition, see what it is we're actually talking about, and what areas in our community are in question. That's how we got here. This is a difficult process. It is a long, arduous process. And I have asked anyone that has come and talked to me, and even from up here, patience will rule the day. Understanding that this is a long process. This is not something you can snap your fingers, wave a magic wand at, and have that definition, those rules, regulations, and a clear path forward. That's just not how it works. We're halfway through the process right now. We have a map in front of us. We have verbiage, but it's not done. And I think that's where we made the mistake, and we did, by not explaining that better. We have half a definition, we have half a map. We are right smack dab in the middle of this process. We are talking about limited areas. This is not a blanket moratorium. People should not be penalized or denied a process on Green Street when this has nothing to do with Green Street. And I'm using that as an example. The why is to protect the property owner, to protect the town of Silverton, and to protect the areas in question. We have engaged Ironwood to work with us so that we can all work together with Clarion to have the best understanding possible to make those decisions. That's what we've been elected to do. You guys can elect us all day long. And if we come to a difficult place or a difficult decision, yeah, I guess we could kick it back to you. Then why are we here? I have a hard problem with that. We are supposed to make difficult decisions, and not everyone is going to be happy with those decisions. That's also what compromise is all about. This map, these definitions will have everyone's input. I appreciate everyone being here right now, but the process isn't done. That's all I ask, is that we continue to allow the process to work. It might be slow, but it is working in everyone's favor, whether you know it or not. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay. Jordan, did you have your hand up earlier? Did you want to add another comment?
You can come back to me in a minute. I did have my hand up before, but I took it down.
Okay. Okay, well, so I just want to reiterate sort of our process here tonight. We need to have a trustee deliberation, and the trustees need to make a decision on the specific agenda item, which is an ordinance to temporarily suspend permits on areas. So this is a discussion about a moratorium, and I think it's really tempting and easy to sort of make this our wetlands discussion, but just to redirect us back to our agenda item, that is deciding on a moratorium or not. So I'll say a couple of words and I'll be brief because I've said a lot of words on this and I don't really have anything new to say tonight other than I would echo a lot of what Dana said in terms of just our interpretation of process and what that looks like in the community. And I think also what Jim said, like, I think what we're doing is we're navigating a complex problem. And I said this at the planning commission meeting the other night that I think we have a lot of agreement on love of the natural world. There is no way a person could live in this town and not have a love of the natural world. It's way too natural. So I think that there's a lot of commonality there. And I think what we're discussing a little bit is how to do that in a way that balances private property needs and public processes and priorities and staff capacity. And we are at the nexus of these conflicting sometimes or just really complicated spheres. And so I don't think that we're trying to get to different places, but I don't think that a moratorium, specifically what we're talking about tonight, is a process. A moratorium is not. I think we're believing that it's buying us time and it's going to help us implement a process. I think it's a full hijack of priorities and it becomes the priority. And I think it's really important that we stay the course with a few things, and I'll say them here. I think that the staff has clearly not recommended this action and that the staff has a full plate with lots of other priorities on it, including housing and infrastructure, grant writing. I think that we have legal vulnerabilities on this issue. I think that we have a much better process that we are paying for through Clarion to work on our code, and it may not be on the timeline that we prefer, and it may not be as rapid as we would hope, but there is a process in place that's going to allow us to address the potential of regulating non-jurisdictional wetlands through our code. However, wetlands are currently regulated and protected under the jurisdictional code. And I also want to acknowledge that while we've had a lot of public comment in person and on Zoom tonight, we also have received public comment through email, and we don't have a really clear legal way of including that in a public hearing, but I did want to acknowledge that we've received a lot of email public comment. And it's primarily been against a moratorium. I don't think comments against a moratorium should be conflated with comments with a position that we don't want to protect wetlands. I think what we need to remember is our agenda item tonight is a moratorium. And so I am not in favor of a moratorium. I have not been in favor of this moratorium all along. And I think that what we've been doing in these meetings is not part of a process. And if we had a process in place and we were designing with a specific outcome in mind, whether that's preservation or regulation or purchasing of property to put in conservations, we would probably have a little more clarity at this point. And I think we would have a little less divisiveness in the conversation. So I just want to scan my notes in case there's anything. I think my position is clear. I do support finding ways of protecting wetlands. I just don't think this is the way to go about it. I don't think our staff has recommended it, and I think we're ignoring their advice by voting for a moratorium. Okay, so I think that in terms of our process in tonight's meeting, this is a public hearing. And so our next move is, I don't want to stifle any discussion. I want to keep us focused on the topic of a moratorium. And I'm wondering if anyone would be willing to, if we need further discussion, let's have it. We need to be really transparent, I think, about our thinking. And otherwise, we need to move towards decision making.
Yeah, I want to disagree with you really quickly and read from the packet. When is a moratorium warranted? Entering a moratorium implies a local government is working towards resolving a community issue. I mean, this is that. I feel really strongly like this is that. And I feel really strongly that we're going to end up where we were several years ago with a couple of projects that we couldn't do anything about. And we're going to have a bunch of people that are vocal about, not wanting it. And we're going to have to say, we haven't done anything. So that's all.
I respect that.
I wanted to have a quick comment as well. Jim, I appreciate your feedback that we're in the middle of the process. We've got a map. I think Tyler, absolutely from the memo is a tool for solving a community issue. I think again, I still just really get stuck is that it needs to have a clear regulatory intent. Like there needs to be an intention to get to a regulatory approach, solution. And I don't think this board hasn't been able to answer that question. And I don't think kicking this can to the next board, they'll really be able to effectively answer that question. And so I think that's why it's appropriate to put it to the community to answer that values question is, do you want a regulatory approach in the land use code? And we can get to a result where the outcome may be what I want, maybe what someone else's want, maybe what you want. But at the end of the day, we need an outcome where the land use code either has a chapter and a section on what you can and can't do on non-jurisdictional wetlands, or that section doesn't exist. And we haven't had that prioritization, that we haven't answered that regulatory question, which is why I haven't been able to say to staff, hey, yeah, go pursue a regulatory approach, because I think we haven't answered that question. So we are in the middle of the process, but I don't think we've answered that question.
Opportunity for a question? We have Jordan with his hand up.
Oh.
First of all, I'm finally being seen that you guys are also frustrated with the town council structural process. I feel like I've reiterated that fact many times, but that's neither here nor there at this point. And I think the reason that we can't make that determination of regulation is that we're not done with the process. We don't have the information to make that determination whether we should regulate something or not. And that's kind of at the same point that the board is at, as if we kick it to the public as well. We're just telling the public to make an uninformed decision rather than the town making town board making an uninformed decision. So yeah, it just seems to me, it feels like the whole point of the moratorium is to be able to make an informed decision about regulation. And I think it should be the public that makes that decision. But you also shouldn't have people fixing a car while they're driving it, right? You have to be able to stop and figure out what is wrong and what's going on before you can make the best decision possible.
I think if we pass a moratorium tonight, it comes with the intent that we're directing staff to draft wetland regulations. So it's one and the same, like we're setting a moratorium and we're moving towards regulations. So I just want to remind us of our voting parameters tonight. So in order for something to be passed or denied, we need to have at least a 4-person majority. And so I'm wondering if someone would be willing to make a motion.
I'd like to make a comment first before we do that. And it's to piggyback off of what Jordan just said. And it is what we are doing right now is utilizing the science, gathering the science and information behind it to make informed decisions. And I made this comment, you were there at the planning commission. And we, the town of Silverton, each and every one of you, all of us up here, we are in the unique position to get it right the first time. And that is not many places can say that they can do that. We have that availability right now to get it right the first time. And getting it right the first time is not necessarily rushing into something when you're in the middle of a process. It's getting that information, gathering it, the science part of it, the informational part of it, which includes the science, getting all the teams together, getting all the players together, and coming up with a true definition that we can make informed decisions on. And I caution everyone that without that information, without that complete information, we are not making a decision based on all the facts and all the information and being informed. Waiting and allowing the process to work, which is what I've said the whole time, and this is just me, this is my opinion, and utilizing the dollars that we've spent towards this, we can get it right the first time. That's me.
Okay, so I hear your support for a moratorium. I hear Tyler's support for a moratorium, and I hear Jordan's.
Well, I think the
With some-
exact definition is imposing a temporary suspension on accepting construction permit applications in those areas defined as wetlands within Silverton town limits.
I hear your support for the temporary suspension on accepting construction permit applications in those areas defined as riverine and slope wetlands. Would someone like to make a motion?
And before we do, I'm just gonna go ahead and read the other 3 bullet points in the packet for when is a moratorium warranted.
Mhm.
Time is required for the study and development of a new or amended regulation. Public outreach, engagement, and participation are needed in the preparation of regulations. The local government may need extra time to consider a novel regulatory issue. I feel like that's the definition of what we're discussing. And yeah, just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Tyler. I think to me, it still just comes down to, I don't think we've answered that question of whether the regulations are. I won't speak for anybody else. I have not answered that question for myself in the affirmative that regulations for non-jurisdictional wetlands are warranted.
Are we allowed to make any more comments? No.
I'm sorry, because this is a public hearing, our public comment period is limited to the process of the public hearing.
I just as a suggestion, it'd be nice for us to be able to hear what y'all say and be able to respond in the future.
Thanks for that feedback.
My responses, I guess I'll wait till the next time, hopefully it's one back.
We're really constrained by the format of the public hearing. We can have Clay, the lawyer, weigh in on that. If that. Clay, would you like to give us advice on the structure of the public hearing and receiving public comment at this time?
Yeah. If you open back up public comment, you got to open it back up completely. So that's why public comment has a kind of a beginning and an end period, so that you're not constantly going back and forth, not only between the trustees, but with possibly multiple different persons in the discussion. At this point, you have closed public comment. If you wanted to open it back up, it's certainly within your power to do so. I don't suggest it, because then everybody now gets to weigh in again, and you can't limit it to just one person or anything else. So you can, it's not typical. And I would stick to, my advice is to stick to the format that you described at the beginning, because that's what the public would understand and what you've already explained. But again, you do have the authority to do it if you want.
I think we've been advised to listen to your advice, and I think we'll continue with the process that we laid out at the beginning of the meeting. So we can continue trustee discussion and deliberation. We can also put a motion on the table. My recommendation, we've spent hours discussing this, and it is a big decision. I think there's a lot at stake. I think we've heard from a lot of stakeholders in the decision, and I think that this issue, it feels very urgent. And I also think that the actual threat to our wetlands is not proportional to the amount of time and resources and energy that we're spending in this particular subject of a moratorium. I think the wetlands are really significant to our community, and we have acreage that we need to address, and we have a process in place in our code rewrite. And I think it's time for us, if we don't have any additional comment, I think we need to move towards making a decision.
I have.
Trustee discussion, I should say.
Sorry.
Trustee discussion.
I want to read an excerpt. I read this earlier. It's page 8 in your packet, for those of you following along. And this is from the Ironwood information. It says, and I'm quoting, because of the timing of the 2023 mapping outside of the wet season, but when wetlands are most easily mapped based on vegetation, soils, and hydrology, Ironwood recommends that a few wetland boundaries be verified during the 2024 wet season, which may result in minor revisions of the wetlands boundaries. Meaning, even our consultants are asking for more time to allow them to finish the study, to finish the map, to update this information. So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that when we're voting, we're going to be voting on these specific areas, correct? Utilizing this map as the tool and knowing that we're halfway through the process, utilizing the map as the tool and only focusing on those areas of question and not any other place within town of Silverton limits. So we're really being hypersensitive and hyper-focused on these specific areas on the map, which is equal to 3% of the town of Silverton.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying.
And that's based on the information
We've limited
provided.
the scope.
Right.
We've limited the scope, and I think that was smart. And I think that the other element to the decision that we're making tonight is that embedded in a decision to vote for a moratorium is the direction to staff, really to be very clear and direct to staff that we then want them to begin drafting regulations. So this is lifting this conversation and this process out of a code rewrite and out of the clarion work and putting it onto our town staff and saying the outcome that we expect by the end of the moratorium is wetland regulations via our town staff. And I think that takes that process out of the public engagement sphere and it puts it onto our town staff and it sends them in the direction of wetland regulations without any public engagement. And then actually to Tyler's point, it will require public engagement. And so then like when you read that list, to me, that was sort of the list of like, wow, this means that for the next 10 months, our staff must and will legally be required to work towards resolving the community issue. Time will be required for the study and development of new amended regulation, public outreach, engagement, and participation. Like I read the same list and interpreted it in a totally other way. The local government may need extra time to consider a novel regulatory issue. And we get to the end of the 10 months and we've put a lot on our staff's plate. And we've said, we want you to prioritize this. And the legal parameters of a moratorium require that they prioritize it. And at the end of that 10 months, I'm not sure that the public will have had the opportunity required to weigh in on that outcome. I don't think that as a community, we are that clear.
So the
on the
conclusion of this study is December of 2024.
But in our planning commission meeting, I heard Emily say that we have the mapping we need.
Right, but she also did say, the consultant did say on page 8, that might change with the additional information that is needed to actually finish the study. So, and then reading the actual motion right here for ordinance 2024-03, the town of Silverton imposes a temporary suspension on accepting construction permit applications in those areas defined as riverine and slope wetlands in the Ironwood Consulting Wetlands Boundary Map within Silverton town limit. So we're not, and again, this is my understanding, we're not voting on an over-encompassing blanket moratorium. We are not doing that at all. We're actually asking for a temporary stoppage so that we can better define these questionable areas on the map.
I think,
And
Jim, but
even
there
in a
still has
limited
to be an
scope,
outcome from
I
that.
understand, and well, the outcome of that is we
priority.
get the information and then we will be able,
There has to be a regulatory outcome from that, is my understanding.
I understand.
This is why I think we are at an impasse, is that because of the makeup of the board right now, sitting in these seats, being honest and transparent, there are not the votes to pass a moratorium. And so I feel like we need to decide, what do we want to direct staff to do as next steps around public engagement?
And I think we have to caution ourselves there because this isn't a work session and that might take us outside the scope of the identified items on our public hearing agenda.
Thanks.
If that's how you feel, I think you should put forth a motion and let's see what happens. Good, go for it.
This is hand up.
Okay, let's hear from Jordan. We don't want to stifle our discussion, but we do need to make a decision.
Yeah, I would just say one last quick thing is moving towards drafting of regulation leaves a broad spectrum open, right? Because drafting of regulation could be anything from no regulation to extreme regulation and anything that would fall in between those two things. And it leaves a multitude of options open for the public to engage with versus the other option is a zero-sum outcome of just saying no. And we're taking that away from public engagement, having all of those potentially a litany of outcomes that would fall within that spectrum of between no regulation and extreme regulation. And I don't have a idea of what that regulation is yet until we get kind of the final outcome of things, or if any.
I agree, Jordan, that we need to have that conversation. I think it needs to happen as part of the land use code rewrite, and it doesn't need a moratorium attached to it.
And I think if we were to do that tonight, that would lack clarity for our staff. That range sounds really broad to me, and I think would add to the confusion and the prolonging of, I think it may muddy the process further. I think to vote for a moratorium tonight needs to be to vote for the staff to pursue the drafting of regulations, and we would need to be very clear about what we want that to look like so that they can be successful. That's how we support our staff.
Staff, have any comments over there?
Yes. I do not support no regulation as an option during moratorium. That is probably less legally defensible, and it is very unclear for staff to pursue that. If we want to go back out to the community, absolutely, we are willing to go back out to the community and ask if they want regulations or not. But a moratorium is not the mechanism to make that happening. And I just want to reiterate that that's not the mechanism for more community engagement. We can go out to the community if you want a regulation and present different types of regulations, but not doing a regulation during that time is not an option.
And we are paying Clarion to do this work with our community. Okay, so I think we're stuck because the majority would like to get the majority's way. And unfortunately tonight, the majority is not the majority, just because of the voting parameters that we're stuck with due to 2 recusals. So we have a board of 7, which makes 4 our majority, which means to pass anything that we need 4 of us, and there are only 5 of us here tonight. So, when is a majority?
No,
it takes 4.
We are.
I agree with you. Let the process work. And if it's 2 to 3 and 3 to 2 and whatever, let it fall where it may.
Make a motion. Lead us a motion.
Get out there.
Would someone like to make a motion to, I've got to say this so I remember what the yes and the no is. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance 2024-03, an ordinance of the town of Silverton imposing a temporary suspension on accepting construction permit applications in those areas defined as riverine and slope wetlands in the Ironwood Consulting Wetlands Boundary Map within Silverton town limits.
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Kränker,
No.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Birma,
Yes.
trustee George,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
No. Okay, so the ordinance will not pass tonight. And that is the final item on our agenda this evening. So with that, I adjourn our meeting. It is 8:14. Thank you for your participation and being here tonight.
Process worked. That's it.
Thanks, guys.
Honor the process.
Lots of.
Something.